Today's episode of Socially Democratic is presented to you by Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a progressive campaign agency that specialises in campaigning and community organising. We work with non-profit and community-based organisations, trade unions, progressive businesses and social democratic parties across the globe. Dunn Street develops community engagement and organising strategies to win campaigns both big and small, and we train engagement staff, volunteers and organisers in leadership and power building. And if you want to create change in your community, then hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. Today's episode is also brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. When you need support with a legal issue, it can feel daunting. And that's why for over 100 years, Maurice Blackburn has been helping guide clients with their legal needs. They're here to help you when you need them the most, from workplace to medical injuries, class actions, occupational diseases, and wills and estates planning. As Australia's leading plaintiff law firm, they have the local knowledge and the national network with the experience that you can count on. To find out more, simply visit their website, mauriceblackburn.com.au. Today's episode is also brought to you by SwiftFox. Every moment on a campaign matters. That means you need the tools that you can trust, lists that are up to date, phone banks that can change minds, emails that drive donations, events that will energise the community online and offline, and text blasts that distill your message perfectly. SwiftFox CRM is made for campaigners by campaigners, and to find out more, go to their website, swiftfoxcrm.com, to win your next campaign. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic, your weekly centre-left politics and campaigns podcast, out every Friday, that dives into the progressive campaigns of the day and the people leading them from home and abroad. And we're heading over to the Netherlands today to talk about the Dutch elections that happened last week. And we're going to be speaking to Ali Hashem, who we've had on the show before, who also has his own social democratic podcast called Forging Links, and Lianne Schuuring, who is a member for the provincial parliament in Limburg. She's a Labor Party member in the provincial parliament down there. And both of them are going to help me unpack what happened in the Dutch elections last week. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And if you like the show, please be sure to give us 5 stars on Apple Podcast and leave us a review. And for all the updates, don't forget to follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. All right, let's get to today's episode. We are taping this one on a Wednesday evening on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. And the dedicated listeners of Socially Democratic will know that from time to time we talk about election campaigns that are overseas. And we had a episode maybe in September this year, starting to blur. When I was over in the Netherlands doing some work, we met some great people from the Dutch Labour Party, or the PvdA, to do a preview of the elections in the Netherlands. And they have now happened. And so now we are going to do a review of the elections that took place last week in the Netherlands. And to help me unpack the results, I'm once again joined by a man that is the host of Forging Links, a social democratic podcast that is sweeping Europe as we speak. Ali Hashem, welcome back to Socially Democratic, comrade.
Cheers, mate. Thanks.
And this time around, we're joined by someone else, because we had Mikhail on the show, but she's now been elected to Parliament, so she's too lofty for us to come on the podcast. That's not true. We didn't ask her. She's probably busy doing the count. However, she's been ably replaced by someone just as talented. She is a Labor member for the provincial parliament in Limburg. Lianne Schuuring, welcome to Socially Democratic. And tell me, I hope I did not butcher your surname.
It's fine. It is a very Dutch name. I understand.
I was saying off air to Lianne before, I worked so hard in learning how to pronounce Groningen, and I still don't know if I've nailed it, but I feel like in spirit I've nailed it, and that's as far as my Dutch is getting. But anyway, I'll work on, hopefully by the end of this episode, I've got your surname down pat as well. But thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so the election was held last week. For folks at home that aren't familiar with Dutch politics, very similar to Australia, actually, they have 150 seats in the House of Representatives. You need 76 seats to form government. The former centre-right coalition was in power, and it comprises of, that coalition had four parties: the People's Party for Freedom and Democracy, or VVD, the Democrats 66 or D66, the Christian Democratic Appeal, which sounds like a Good Friday fundraiser, the CDA, and the Christian Union, the CU. And there was a bit of shenanigans over migration within that coalition. It all fell apart. And so we had these snap elections. And here we are to do a post-election analysis. My first question to you, Ali, is who were the big losers in this election campaign? Oh, sorry, this election itself, not the campaign.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to first start with, stand in solidarity with the Aboriginal people and the vote they had. We were quite disappointed to hear about the outcome of the referendum. I think it was telling of kind of the mood of some of the changes that need to take place. And I feel like it's also indicative of today's, what we're going to be talking about, is people not willing to let go of their privilege. At least that's my conclusion. So I think the biggest losers in this case is people who are on the center have lost significantly. The center is completely empty now. What was going to replace the center, which was the NSC, which is a new party called the New Social Contract. And Omzicht is a person who used to be a member of parliament for the Christian Alliance. And he split from them, essentially split from the government because they were in government, and then formed his own party. And as a result, he's the only kind of center right left, not left, but as in left in the field. But the CDA completely out of politics now. Like they're really small. The CU is out, and D66 is also out. So technically, the government lost because also VVD, who was in power with Rutte as prime minister, have also lost. Now, their loss doesn't necessarily translate to Labour's gain directly, and then we'll talk about that in more detail.
Okay. Lianne, to you, who are the winners out of this election?
So in terms of seats, both the PVV, so the People's Freedom Party, gained 20 seats. The New Social Contract Party, the new one, gained 20 seats. And then our coalition with the Greens also gained seats. We gained 8 seats compared to the combined seats that we had before. And then there is the BBB, which is the Farmer Civilian Alliance, also gained a few seats. So they are sort of dispersed over different parties, I would say. Yeah.
So, Lianne, follow-up question to you. The PVV, who are they? Who was their leader? Tell us a bit about the politics of this mob.
So their leader is called Geert Wilders. He is actually the longest sitting member of parliament that we have. And he started out as part of the VVD, but he created his own party. And his main point that he was running on was immigration and how to stop immigration. And he's very well known for his anti-Islam ideas. He is more populist. He has very harsh phrases that he uses all the time. And he really presented himself sort of as the new party to sort of take over where the VVD wasn't able to deliver.
And this new social contract party, who the hell are these guys? I didn't even know about these blokes.
So Pieter Omtzigt has also been a parliamentarian for a very long time, always part of the Christian Democrats. And I think he is a very traditional conservative social democrat. He was more on the conservative side of their party. There were a lot of personal issues surrounding his leaving that party, where they tried to sort of push him out as well. And so he founded his own party. But he has gained a lot of popularity and notoriety in the Netherlands for bringing a big scandal to light in the social security system that we have that really hurt a lot of people. And he was one of the parliamentarians to really shine a lot of light on that and fighting for change. And that's why he gained a lot of popularity in the last few years, I would say.
Yeah, I remember reading about that a while back when that first happened. Ali, to you, just talk to us a bit about, I know we sort of mentioned this on our preview podcast a couple of months back, but describe for us the electoral conditions leading into this election that led to such a strong result for the, well, I guess what we'd call the far right party in these elections.
Okay, so let's just be clear. The Farmers' Party was on a high, so they were projected around mid this year. So when the election was announced, before the NSC comes into the field, they were projected to get like 35 seats. Now those 35 seats ended up going to the far right, so PVV. So it's almost, you could have predicted that in terms of a left-right distribution, nothing changed. Now, what I believe did happen is a lot of strategic voting of the center. So the center the people on the center right went more right, and the people on the center left went more left. But in the end, the majority of the country is more right than left. In terms of people who went out and voted, there were a significant amount of people that didn't vote in strategic places. And this, I believe, is going to be telling of also the strategy of the Conservatives in the UK and other parts of Europe, which is to sow doubt in the left. It's not important to defeat the left. It's important to sow doubt in the hearts and minds of left voters about the left option. And so I believe here is what happened. People thought that NSC, which was the center-right, the Christian Democrat alternative, was going to become also potentially, he was going to be prime minister. He played that down. He was potentially, going to be more on the center. But then when people started really questioning his policies, it was very clear he was more conservative and more on the right. So a lot of people withdrew their support, but I believe that withdrawal of support for him translated to people not voting rather than voting.
Interesting. Lianne, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, because I think it's important to sort of note that in the last couple of elections, we've seen very big movement of voters. So there were new parties that became really big. And then the next election, there was another new party that became really big. So it was the Forum of Democracy. In the provincial elections, it was the Farmers' Party. Now it's the PVV. And it's sort of the same group that is moving around between different right-wing populist parties, I would say. And the PVV is a little bit unique in that sense because they are much older. But for a very long time, most political parties refused to work with them. So our current Prime Minister, still Rutte, always sort of refused to form a coalition government with him because he has a lot of viewpoints that are just illegal, basically, at this point, and extremely problematic. So they are really much further to the right, I would say, than the Farmers' Party, for example. And somehow in this campaign, they have become more acceptable based on how other parties treated them, especially the VVD, but also how they themselves presented themselves without actually changing their platform. If you read the platform, it's exactly the same. It still has all these points that are very problematic and extreme. But they presented themselves very different. And I think that's also how they attracted a lot of voters.
I do want to come to some of that a little bit later on in the show, but one thing I am interested in the English-speaking media commentary of the election result. They're describing this as the biggest upset in Dutch politics since the Second World War. Ali, to you first, why is this being seen as such a big upset?
I think people don't know what's happening in the Netherlands. That's why they would say that, because objectively that is the case, yes. But just like what Lianne said, it's the same. Voters are are shopping around. What they're shopping around, I believe, for is a maintenance of a nativist rather than a nationalist or popularist view, a nativist Dutch view of keeping the status quo in their benefit. And their benefits have been, and what I mean by benefits is an economic benefit, social benefit, housing, in terms of privileges of, they're shopping around to make sure that remains in a good trajectory for them. What threatens that is climate change policies threaten that. Housing market, any changes in social security threaten that. And what I mean is in bringing it down. So it's very difficult for any coming Labour government to either increase taxes would be very problematic because that will remove privilege from the middle class, and then in turn do anything, not be serious about immigration is seen as a threat to what is seen as the lower working class in terms of their ability to find high-paying jobs or any form of paid work. So if we look at the statistics, there is no massive shift in terms of a left-right distribution. What has been shifted is which party they move towards. And so that is what has been upsetting for people that I know who don't necessarily engage in politics, which was them realizing their colleagues, their friends are not necessarily as tolerant or as welcoming as they like to portray themselves as. Because clearly people are trying to keep the privilege to themselves, keep things as they are as much as possible.
Lianne, can I get a sense from you to the point that Ali just made there about people from the broad left and the broad right shopping around? Let's focus on this on the right for the moment. Why do you think so many voters deserted the main centre left party? Does this desertion go to the theory of the former Prime Minister Rita, whatever his name was? Were a lot of people just voting for him because of? I mean, what was he? He had a nickname, Teflon something. Like everyone just sort of thought he was, the guy, right? So was it the collapse in their vote because of he was no longer contesting in this election, or was there other underlying reasons that we're missing here?
So wait, you were talking about the center left party, but you mean the VVD, right? The center right.
Yeah, no, sorry. I mean,
Yeah.
my apologies if I said. I mean the center right. Yes.
So I think there's a few things that played a role. I think a lot of people were very unhappy with this party already based on the results of the policies that they had in the past years. I think in general, if you ask a lot of people, like they've been in government for 13 years, did the country become better or worse over those 13 years? They would have answered it has gotten worse. And a lot of people still voted for him, I think, partly because they liked him personally. They always have these very positive campaigns that never really talk about their policy ideas. They're always very sort of superficial, but I think in terms of campaigning, they are one of the best parties to really fine-tune all their messages. They had a leadership shift, which is always complicated, of course. But I think what also played a big role is that they were held responsible for the collapse of the government, and they chose migration as a topic to let it fail. And if people then agree, like, yes, migration is the biggest problem that we have to fix, then why stick with them and not go to the original party that put this on the agenda? Especially because the VVD also said that they were now open to form a government with the PVV, which before now they never opened that door. So they opened the door a little bit, and then Wilders himself sort of completely kicked it open and took full advantage of this possibility. So I think for a lot of people from the VVD, they saw an alternative that was also realistic now.
Because the government fell over on the issue of immigration.
And not just immigration in general, it fell on family reunification for asylum seekers. So it's a very small group of migration where most people really don't have an issue with. Like, it's very typical that they chose this in order to create this many issues.
And so was the campaign then, this was the central issue that the major parties were campaigning on, was it on immigration, do you think? therefore that created a pathway for Wilders to do so well?
I think the last 2 weeks, it became more of a central topic. The strange thing is that even though the government fell over immigration, then actually sort of social security became a much more prominent campaigning topic, also because Pieter Omtzigt, for example, made that a very strong topic. But then in the end, it sort of turned back to migration, and also a lot of other issues were framed in the light of migration. So when we were talking about the housing crisis, they were constantly matching it to migration and all these other. They were talking about study immigration, about international workers. Like, they really sort of broadened it up and connected a lot of topics to this.
Ali, let's talk about the man, Geert Wilders. Lianne mentioned before, he's been in politics and in the parliament for a very, very long time. Dutch voters know him, they know his party, and they have, in previous elections, I won't say rejected, but they've never given them such a mandate, right? What did they do to overcome concerns at previous elections that voters had to see them pick up, what was it, 20, pick up 20 seats? They got 37 seats in the House of Representatives now, and that are the biggest party in Dutch politics as we stand.
Yep. So, look, some pundits say that he became more credible because the VVD, Jezus, let's just go to the VVD for a moment. They selected as leader the former justice minister who had struggled to keep tabs on the whole issue of the nitrous oxide restrictions. So that was an issue that made the farmers, Drebe, really famous. So it was about the pollution produced by farms that was to be reduced based on the New Green Deal on the European side, and the Netherlands is going to get fined by the European Union for the level of nitrous oxide that they release. So she was leading the negotiations of that, and she had so that brought her to prominence. However, that issue did not come up in the elections at all, almost. So that's what made the Drebe very popular. So let's just say the whole nation was flowing, especially the provincial elections only a few months before that, swayed all the way to Drebe. Now, in the election campaign, Drebe failed to capture that. So it failed to capture the imagination of people. So that's one part that we need to be clear of. Perhaps Wilders benefited from the failure of Drebe because in March, they were predicted to get the same amount of votes in the polls as what Wilders got. So you can almost say, okay, it's the same voters that said they will go for Drebe, and they simply went to PVV. Now, if we then take another step and we say, okay, who did they select? We said this Minister of Justice is a female. Now, do not underestimate the level of misogyny in politics, the level of people not willing to actually put women in power. And I believe there is a strong, unfortunate, Christian conservative sentiment against that. So that is still an issue in the Netherlands, even though objectively it's a tolerant country, etc. Amongst the conservative Christians, they still don't allow women, some women on their governance boards of churches. And that sentiment, I believe, still flows upwards and has an effect into politics. Now, the third thing, the background of the former Minister of Justice, Jezus, she is an immigrant herself. She was born outside of the Netherlands. She's very Dutch, I would say, in terms of sentiment. But on a very telling, she had a meeting on TV with one of her supporters, who she asked that supporter, "Where did you come from today?" And the person said, "Oh, I came from," and she mentioned the province. And then that same person that she's interviewing, she told the minister, "And you come from Turkey." So she's not asking, "Where's your background from?" She's asking, "Where did you literally come from today?" To me, that was telling on the background in people's mind. So I think those two did work against the leader of the center right. I believe if Rutte stood, he would have won, and that is because so any change. So I believe that if they chose a different leader, I still think they would have got the same outcome for different reasons. But if Rutte stood, I believe he would have won this election because he is able to ensure there's no doubt about where he stands. Omzicht tried to portray himself as a centralist, but came across as a conservative. Yezilgus tried to portray herself as a right wing, but of course her background puts her as a centralist. And then, of course, if we want to talk about Drebe, they had no platform at all in terms of leadership. So in the end, people had on the right, I believe people had no alternative leader than Wilders because he has been the most consistent, and consistency paid off this time for him.
Lianne, is there any follow-up thoughts? So I saw your sort of head moving around there with a whole bunch of different points that.
I was thinking about what Ali said about Yezilgus, the VVD leader, because I think what they did during the campaign was really interesting because it was the first time sort of that they offered somebody who might become the first female prime minister, for example. But they didn't really push that point forward. So in everything she said, the way she dressed, the way she portrayed herself, she was saying, like, I know that I am, a woman of Turkish descent or immigrant background, but on the inside, I'm basically a white old man. Like everything she said was just like, don't worry, I'm still the same. You don't have to expect any change if I'm going to do this. And so other media, for example, never really made that an issue. They asked about it a few times, and then she always said exactly the same thing that Rutte said, like, no, we don't select people based on gender. We select them based on quality. And I just happen to be the best candidate for the job right now. And she was really on message on that point. Like they really drilled that into her. There were certain frames that she used almost daily, and this was one of them, I think. So I wonder how big of an issue that in the end turned out to be. I find that difficult to estimate at this point.
Sticking with you, Liana, I just want to get a sense for our non-Dutch audience to understand where is the strength of this the Wilders party, the PVV, because you represent a provincial part of the Netherlands. I mean, are they predominantly? Is their base in the rural areas? Is it in the cities? Where did they make up ground to get these 37 seats? I'm interested in getting a sense of where they actually had success.
So I would say not in the main cities, and in the Netherlands, in the west, there's sort of a very urbanized part, and then more alongside the German border, there is a more rural part. It's a little bit different, I think, especially from countries like Australia, because you drive to the other end of the country in 2.5 hours, right? So we're talking on a very different scale here. But in the province that I live in, the PVV was the largest party in every single municipality, for example. Geert Wilders himself is also from Limburg, and people here are always a little bit more likely to vote on local candidates. What I think that he does is that he voices certain frustrations that a lot of people recognize, and I think to a part are very legitimate. Like there is a cost of living crisis, there is a housing crisis, education, healthcare, the police force, everything has gone down in quality or have become more expensive. And I think it's also fair to connect this towards like the more general trends along globalization or either neoliberalism, but that's more of a left-wing analysis, of course. And he sort of phrases this in a very populist way, and then a lot of people sort of feel heard and like he's paying attention to the problems that they face. But then he sort of moves on and finds a scapegoat basically on everyone with a migration background. And he's, as I said, he's very anti-Islam. Like they're still in his platform that he wants to, make the Quran illegal, that he wants to close all the mosques, stuff like that. And then he says it's because of all these new people that you can't find housing or that your children can't find housing. It's not because we completely destroyed the social housing policy over the past 20 years. No, it's because of them. And this, of course, then makes it extremely problematic, and also something that I still struggle with a little bit, that I understand all these legitimate grievances. And I also think it's fair to look at our own party, because we played our part in that, and that we have to acknowledge as well. But then they make this shift at the end where I'm like, no, that's not something we have to listen to. That's something that we actually have to fight. Like, that's something very different. But he grasped this sentiment, I think, very well, and attracted a lot of voters with that as well.
Let's take a quick break to talk about SwiftFox. Every moment on a campaign matters. You need the tools that you can trust. Lists that are up to date, absolutely. Phone banks that can change minds. Emails that drive donations, and events that will energize the community online and offline. And text blasts that distill your message perfectly. SwiftFox CRM is made for campaigners by campaigners. And to find out more, go to swiftfoxcrm.com to win your next campaign. Okay, let's get back to the show. I did read somewhere that they felt that that Wilders toned down some of that far right rhetoric, particularly in the last couple of weeks. And that was, I just want to get your thoughts on, did he, or is that just wishful thinking?
I mean, he toned down the rhetoric, but he didn't really change his positions. He just said, like, those things, they're not a priority for us right now, so we can wait on those a little bit. There's other things that we have to do first. And you could see also in debates, he became much more, like, his tone became much more friendly. Like, for example, during the last years, the D66 had a female party leader, Sigrid Kaag, who was also the Minister of Finance. And if you see the comments that Wilders made towards her, like he called her a witch, he called her, like, there's so many awful things. And sort of this type of rhetoric, he left out completely. He really changed. He was talking about we have to work together and we have to. And then after he won, during his first interview, he actually made a comment, which, it's so sad, but it was also kind of funny. It was like, yes, of course, I realize now we're the biggest party. This is a huge responsibility. And of course, I know we have to stay within the bounds of the Constitution. And everyone was just like, how did you not notice for the past 24 years when you were a parliamentarian that you have to uphold the Constitution? Like, this is not a new thing. But he is trying to present himself as somebody who can be, a prime minister for everyone in this country. I'm not quite convinced yet, but...
Well, we'll certainly talk about the where do we go to next in a moment. Is there anything, Ali, that you wanted to add to that before we jump over to the other side of the political spectrum and talk about our team and how our fortunes went?
Well, I think it's a good segue that I can give you on what these results mean in terms of where I think the actual votes are coming from in terms of the right-left distribution, and then we'll talk about the left more. So if we look at entrepreneurs with personnel, so entrepreneurs who own a business of at least 2+ people to a couple of hundred, 29% voted for the PVV, 5% voted for the Labour Party, 23% of self-employed voted for PVV, 10% voted for the PVV, the Labour Party. Now, this is not people who are in jobs, but they don't work for the government. 24% voted for PVV, 17% for the Labour Party. This is now workers in the government. 19% PVV, 19% PvdA. And this is now the biggest one. People who are workers. So they are, people who are arbeidsgeschikt, which means incapacitated, unable to work, right, Lianne?
Arbeidsongeschikt, yeah.
Ongeschikt, yeah. People who are incapable of working. So they are people literally living off benefits. 33% voted for PVV, 16% for the Labour Party. So these are the very people that the Labour Party campaigns or is accused of only campaigning for. 2 out of 3 voted for the PVV. Now, people who are unemployed or are looking for work, that's in the same category but slightly different. These are people who could work, so not incapacitated. 31% PVV, 15% for the Labour Party. Again, so and then you have pensioners. It's about equal, and then you have the only people that we win with Labour Party is students or people who are looking to study. That's 27% for the Labour Party and 16% for the PVV. Now, these are polls as a result that were taken after the elections based on where people say they voted. So take that, into consideration.
These are exit polls.
Essentially, we only win with students. Everyone else seems to think we're not good for them.
Lianne, your reflections on
Yeah.
that set of numbers
Yeah,
that
because
Ali just presented.
what I mean, first of all, it's very tragic, but it's also something that I would like to add is that the PVV is often framed as being sort of left on socioeconomic issues. Even though that this is not always true. So he also, during the campaign, he talked a lot about making healthcare more affordable, for example. And so he sort of addresses, at least in rhetoric, a lot of these problems people are facing. But if you look at his voting track record in Parliament, he does not follow up on this. So he voted to make unions less strong, for example, to give them less influence, to be even harder on social security fraud, despite the huge scandal that we had. So all this, so it's sort of this interesting dynamic where a lot of people feel like he is going to address these very legitimate problems that they're facing, and he's sort of building this more economic left-wing profile that is not really based on anything, but it still lives on in people's minds. And I think that is also part why a lot of the groups that Ali mentioned that are traditionally more associated with the Labour Party feel like they want to vote for him, combined with, I think, also something that we have to look at our own party for, is that the faces of, at least the front-facing part of our party, has become much more highly educated, wealthy, and less the voice of regular workers or people who are unemployed.
It's interesting.
Do you mind if I just add to that?
Yeah, go, Ali. Absolutely.
You have to understand, when it comes to who has the most traditional Labour-like outlook, who looks like a traditional Labour leader. If you compare Timmermans, who is the leader of the Labour Party, he was the European Commissioner. He's seen as part of the European establishment. His Labour credentials traditionally are very weak in that sense, because he is seen as part of that elite. And then you look at this humble man who has been serving the people for the last 20 years in Parliament, screaming about their needs for a better social system. We know he isn't a Labour guy. But for the public, that perception, I think, really worked against us, where we put forward somebody has elitist sentiments or credentials far more than the right-wing guy. And I think Labour Party in the Netherlands and across the world need to look very carefully at the type of leaders they select or bring forwards, because people need people that are relatable. And I think the Labour Party in the Netherlands failed this time.
Lianne, do you want to jump in on that
strong
one?
Sentiments.
Because I've got some things I want to put to you guys both. Because what I'm listening to, and certainly what I saw when I was over in the Netherlands, and the conversations that I had with Labour Party activists, both in the formal trainings that we did, also in the pub afterwards, which I think was where you really get to the heart of it all. Was this this uncertainty about how Labor would fare in this. And for folks at home, leading to this election campaign, the Labor Party entered into an agreement, would that be fair to say, or a coalition with the Greens Party. And Timmermans, to the point before that Ali made, became the leader going into this election campaign. It was a unique thing that happened in Dutch politics. And everyone in the pub and in the sessions were saying, well, I don't know how this is going to work out. This may be good. We voted for it. They voted for it. Let's see how we go. The other thing that I found interesting to what you said, Lianne, earlier when you were describing the politics of the PVV and Geert Wilders, you talked about some of the things that he was saying on the campaign, reducing the cost of living, better education, better healthcare, more police on the streets. His voting record may be different, and so therefore he's full of shit, but his campaign clearly was targeted towards what voters wanted to hear. So you could actually say reasonably good campaign by this bloke, right? Those things you were talking about, that's on an Australian Labor Party campaign. That's what we talk about.
It's what we also talk about.
So my question is, did Labor talk about that at this election campaign? And in doing so, why did the numbers that Ali just ran through turn out to be, 2-1 voting for the far right party and not voting for the Socially Democratic Party?
I think that we did talk about that, especially if you look at the platform that we run with. There's always this analysis made by the, what is it called in English? The Bureau of Economic Policy, the CBS in Dutch, that sort of does the calculations behind all these ideas. And not every party joined this. So, for example, the PVV and these more populist parties, they didn't actually do all these calculations, but our party did. And actually, we were the best at fighting poverty, at decreasing taxes on labor, on like all these really sort of traditional economic left-wing positions. I think we had really good policy ideas. We also talked about both, I think, that fighting poverty, fighting climate change, and improving the government. I think those were the three main points that we campaigned on. And one of the challenges, I think, is that this idea of social security, or it's a bit of a broader term in Dutch, bestaanszekerheid, was adopted by almost every party. So a lot of parties also ran on left-wing ideas, which made it a bit more complicated to then fight the differences, even though I think on paper, I still firmly believe that we had the best ideas. But that's, of course, different in how that comes across during the campaign.
But you just mentioned three then: fighting poverty, climate change, and what was the third one? Was it social security?
No, it's the restructuring of the government, or improving.
So you're restructuring the government, right?
Yeah.
That's not jobs, health, education.
Yeah, I mean, they phrased it a little bit differently. So I think, as I said, like bestaanszekerheid is a much broader term than fighting poverty or social security. It also includes social housing, healthcare, education, the public sector, all these other things. It's a very broad term in that sense. So it is the way, and I'm not really sure about this, but it could be the way that you phrase it, that it's more or less appealing. But I think content-wise, we try to bring all of that across.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of times I've seen the Labor Party in Australia have the best policies, but then can't communicate it to the electorate because they just don't get it, right? Is that what's happened here? I mean, Ali, to you, is that your reflections on the campaign? I know it's only just happened, but
okay. Let's just see how they try to engage with the public. The media landscape in terms of television is much more right-wing than left-wing. The newspapers are more left-wing than right-wing. So the methods of communicating with the public played a role here. But then if we look at in terms of health policies, at the end of the day, what we were trying to improve in health was trying to restructure the system. So most of what we were trying to do was systematic, which is great, which is what is needed. But the Labour Party wants to make systemic change, but never really articulated that it's making systemic change. So it never really said, look, we're going to make policy changes, but the effects are going to be potentially, some of the effects are going to be generational. So not now. Whereas the PVV says, no, now we're going to break the system now. We're going to decrease the amount of health insurance own risk that you pay. We're going to do those things right now. Labour couldn't commit to those make those commitments because we need money to make systemic change. We can't just come and just subsidize what's happening now.
But also, I mean, I agree with this, that this is a way of campaigning, but I think this is also an interesting point that we are very careful to make sure that everything that we say is true. And you can say we're going to decrease the healthcare cost tomorrow, but you simply can't. It is impossible in the way that the system is set up. You're not allowed to make those changes on short term. You can promise people that you're going to do it, but there's no way you can deliver. And I think we are sometimes a little bit too polite in trying to explain, like, we understand the concern, but we're going to need to have at least 2 years in order to do that. Whereas other parties are like, no, stop. You don't have these problems because you are very rich, but these people have these problems, or we're going to fix it now. And that was a very obvious difference during the campaign.
One statistic tells me all about this health policy problem. Regular smokers, so these are people from the polls who are regular smokers. 37% voted
including
for
you, Ali,
PVV, and 7% voted for the Labour Party. So basically, this goes back to: do you want a long-term better healthcare system? No, they don't. They need right now. They need to make sure that the system works for them because they're regular smokers. And so 3 times as many people went for the PVV because their policies are better. So there's a lot of niche things going on in the climate change. Don't forget, PVV is a climate change deniers. And there's a correlation between climate change denial and COVID vaccination denial. And the data also shows that, something like 70%, I think, let me just bring it up so I'm not trying. Okay, 80% of people who did not get vaccinated voted for the right. So it kind of tells you where the core votes are coming from. Now, the strategic vote, that's what impacted, I think, the whole, adding 5-6 seats this way, that way.
Who, if there was a group of centrist moderate voters, and you can push back on this analysis if I'm wrong here, but I would assume that there are a group of centrist voters that may have voted for the previous government for the last 13 years. Rita goes, they don't have a home, and the argument that both of you made is that they just sort of shifted to the Wilders far right party. Why didn't some of them come to the Labor Party? Why? I mean, if you think about it in terms of houses, there's the centre right house sitting there, but right next door is the centre left house, which is the Labor Party, the PVDR. Why did they decide to keep lurching further right? Why didn't they think, well, I'll just go for the moderate centre left party as opposed to the crazy far right party? That's something because ultimately,
I think
whether it's compulsory election or
you're
not
missing a
compulsory
party
election,
in this. I think you're missing a party in this analysis. I think all those people went to the NSA, the new party of Pieter Omtzigt, from a Christian Democrat perspective, who was considered to be sort of the true middle. I think due to our relation with the Greens, we moved a little bit further to the left, which personally I'm very happy with, but had this idea of us being a center party became more criticized. And then I think a lot of people who really felt like, yes, we really want change because what's happening now is not okay. We don't want to go to the far right. They went to the NSA. Because they also gained 20 seats out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, they picked up 12%, almost 13% of the vote compared to Labor Greens, which was 15.8. So who did vote for the Labor Party then? If we picked up 8 seats, where did these votes come from?
Mostly, I think, from people that voted for the D66 in the last elections. So these are people who I would say economically fall in the middle of the spectrum, but they are progressive, mainly from the cities as well. I think that's a big distinction as well. If you look at all the major cities, I think we did a lot better than outside of those.
Interesting. Ali, do you want to add to that before we move to
Yeah,
what's
I
next?
think Citroen car owners voted for us as opposed to Mercedes and BMW and Audi.
Oh, you've clearly found some document and you're just going to give us
I mean,
every
it's really
single...
interesting to see
these stuff.
whatever they
love these stuff.
analyze.
But essentially, and why I say that, I mean, the people who voted for us in terms of predominantly are people who work for the government because they are aware of the soundness of our policies. So government employees are a good cohort for us. And most of the time, they're also unionized. And the other ones are students. Students vote for us. So, but not necessarily the young. You need to understand. A lot of people say, "Oh, our hope is in the young people. That if they had a better chance of it." In these elections, that proved to not be the case. Just as many young people voted for the right as the left. Now, but that's
They also have this mock elections in high school where both the PVV and the FVD, so the most right-wing parties, became 1 and 2 between 13 and 16-year-olds.
Yep.
So
And so your hope, if your hope is in the young, you're going to be, out of change if you're betting. But the people that we do appeal to basically seem to basically have an education and an awareness. So educated up to university level, but also up to vocational university level above. They're our main cohort, and people who basically have stable, protected jobs. So it tells you that we haven't really appealed to a new cohort. We haven't really done anything. We've maintained the people we benefited our policies benefited 30 years ago.
Why is that, Lianne? Why do you think that the party struggle to appeal to that the what I would call in Australia sort of the outer suburban middle class vote? But
I think there's multiple reasons. I think part of that, what Ali mentioned, like these people that have stable protective jobs are an important cohort for us. But more and more people do not fall in this category. And I think they don't think that we have offered them the correct solutions. We have been part of governments where we have also created more of these flexible, unstable jobs. So part of it is that I think sometimes legitimately, they blame us for that, or they had different expectations from us that we didn't fulfill. Also, I think culturally, we have become more and more progressive as a party, or been more vocal on that. Again, I think rightfully so, but the Netherlands culturally, most people are more conservative, so that they find that less appealing. And in general, I would say that you see that all of the left-wing parties together become smaller and smaller every election. So somehow the whole country is in tiny steps becoming more and more right-wing, but also doesn't help. Yeah.
well, I mean, this is my follow-up question to that. Then is something I find fascinating about European politics, particularly Western European politics. At election time, you have so many political parties. There are 15 parties that now hold a seat in your new parliament when it sits. There were 7 new parties that ran at this election that collected votes. I mean, there was one called Party for Sports, for God's sake. Can anyone just start a party and then all of a sudden start ripping votes off of each other? Like in Australia, we're not a 2-party state like the United States, but we basically kind of are, right? And we do have a lot of cracker parties, but they don't get any votes, and I know our electoral system is different. You've got the list, which is very similar to New Zealand, but man, like, I don't know. I just think that all of these parties it's just too much democracy. It's too much choice. And it's making it harder for moderate, progressive, centre-left and centre-right parties to collect big amounts of votes, get lots of parliamentarians elected, therefore lots of resources. And with those resources, then you can then use that power to create the change that you want. Otherwise, you're just struggling to, and we'll talk a minute about how the hell you're going to form a coalition government out of this puppy. But do you think there are just too many parties, Lianne? Lianne first, and then I'll go to you, Ali.
Yes and no. I agree that some of the parties that ran, they did not have a serious platform. I think the Party for Sport that you referenced, they barely got any votes. Like, they were not a serious candidate. What I like about this system is that it makes the job of representation very obvious. So if you are left wing and you feel that the Labour Party has not done a good job, I don't know the exact procedure. I think you need to collect like 100,000 signatures from different voting districts, and then you can form your own party and you can have a go for parliament, which I think is a very democratic idea. Like, I am unhappy with how I'm represented. I'm going to start my own party and we're going to run for parliament. And then as soon as you have enough votes for one seat, you have one seat. This does make then the parliamentary procedure is a lot more chaotic, but I do think there is a place for smaller groups who feel like my voice also needs to be heard in parliament. And there are a lot of examples where these smaller parties have been able to voice certain concerns that were not heard in parliament before. Also on the left, if you look at the Animal Rights Party, for example, but also Bijeen, which run on a much more like a diversity platform that they really brought to the attention. They had one parliamentarian. They lost their seat this time, but they played a very big role, for example, in the apologies for slavery that the state made. So they have been able to make a difference, and sometimes also a very constructive difference and an important difference. So I'm not necessarily against this idea that it's relatively easy to create your own party. It does create its own sets of challenges that we haven't been able to solve fully, but yeah.
Ali, do you have anything to add to that before we turn to what happens next?
Okay, let's look at the other parliamentary systems that you would say have less political parties involved. The UK is an example. There's 2 main parties and 2 other supplementary parties. The 2 main parties house within them the concept of a broad church. A broad church means within the party we discuss, we formulate, we have groupings, we have lobbies within the party. And so the ones who are most vocal, most challenging, they tend to win the leadership of the party, and then they go to the public with that agenda. What that has ended up doing is, apart from Corbyn, has always been for the Labour Party, apart from Corbyn, has been kind of centre left, where you have sound policies and they give you that normative view. What that has done entailed a suppression of certain fringe views that people believe in the country and therefore drift away. So what the Dutch system resolves is that it says, instead of the parties making space for these other formulated views, they can go directly to the electorate and express their views and opinions. I don't necessarily agree that it works, because what ends up happening is single issue like Bijeen or Denk, or even previously the Green Party, single issue political parties don't have enough clout to be able to influence the process. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they don't. So what they end up benefiting is kind of keeping the status quo going rather than any significant change. That, in this time, has changed because people went en masse towards what was previously a fringe party. So there is no best way of doing this. But parties like the Labour Party in the Netherlands need to reflect on how they are welcoming, how much of a broad church they have been. Because arguably, this kind of middle voice has suppressed a lot of other voices and has forced out a lot of other fringe voters and doubt because of what people perceive as undemocratic processes within our party. We are a very board-driven, so we are very the board of the party locally, nationally governs everything, and so we're not necessarily democratic internally, and yet we portray ourselves as democratic externally. So I think then there needs to be a two-way process here. If we're going to truly represent, then we need to make sure that we're doing that within as much as without.
I think
But
all
we are a
political
lot
parties.
less. Sorry.
No, go, Lianne.
I mean,
Go.
we are a lot
Please.
less board driven than we were 10 years ago. I disagree a little bit with your analysis there, because we do have like a one member, one vote system in all the decisions that are made. It's just that these more fringe opinions, they are not the majority. So even if there is a direct vote on these proposals, they tend to lose. Also, unlike the collaboration with the Greens, like we were allowed to vote on that, and like 90% of the voters said that they were in favor of it. And it's not like we didn't make room for other voices. It's just that in the end, if you then have to vote on the majority, they don't tend to win, and therefore are not represented in the main platform of the party.
That might be the case. Timmermans was the only one on the ballot. The selection committee put him as the only one on the ballot for leadership of the party. The party rejected, the board disrecommended voting for the removal of the monarchy, and only at conference were we able to overturn that. So there is some progress, but structurally the Labour Party is wanting when it comes to governance and democratization.
Can I shed some light on this one? I don't think many social democratic parties in Western liberal democracies are nailing it when it comes to internal democracy. And I actually don't think that it's connected to electoral success. It is. Sorry, you could actually write a thesis on this. In some ways, it is. There are things that the Labor Party in Australia have done that I think that we have electorally benefited from. One of them is we brought in affirmative action policies, rules in our constitution that forced us to ensure that we had far more women running in marginal or targeted or battleground races. And then therefore what we see, and that started in the 90s with a lot of pushback. But now today, in the parliament here in Victoria, the majority of the members for the Labor Party are women. So, and I think that's good for democracy because it creates far more diversity. But
Labour
I
had the
also,
first female prime minister in Australia, right?
yeah, we Julia Gillard a while ago, and the
Yep.
premier in my home state right now, Jacinta Allen, obviously is a woman. But I to the point earlier that I think that Lianne was saying was this notion of a broad church. Social democratic parties have to be a broad church. If they become this sort of niche, smaller and smaller membership-based organization, then if you don't reflect who you want to vote for you, then it becomes harder. And I think that one thing the Labor Party in Australia has managed to do over the 120 years that we've been around is keep this coalition of outer suburban, middle class and working class folks, people living in regional centres like bigger towns that are regional centres, as well as those urban inner city elites as well, academic educated folk as well. It's not easy because sometimes the things that are important to them can clash. Because maybe they may be reasonably socially conservative on a number of issues for the folks out in the suburbs, as opposed to those academics and elites in the city. But it's the values that unite everyone, and if we do that, then you're going to be in a much stronger position. It's not easy to do, I know that, but when I do travel around the world and do work with social democratic parties, I'm always struck by some of those parties that aren't nailing that. It's not the be all and end all, but it damn well helps anyway. And one of the things I'm interested in your thoughts on that. I'll go to you, Lianne, first, and then to you, Ali.
I mean, I think we as a party have a very long tradition of shooting ourselves in the foot when it comes to internal democracy or internal dissenting voices, because we are sort of known as the party that there's always some backbencher that is going to put a knife in the back of the new leadership. And they're not going to say that inside of the room. They're going to say that in an open, in an op-ed piece in a national newspaper. Even now during the campaign, especially of course with the combination with the Green parties, there were some members who thought that we weren't left enough, or there were some members on our side who thought we were going to be too green. And this was like this very public discussion that the media then portrays as, oh, they don't even have their own internal systems in order, so they're very chaotic. Like this is, and it's a very long tradition that we have. And I also think that's why the board of the party is sometimes a bit apprehensive, and you say like, no, we have to, yank everyone together, and this is the line, and no one talks, because we can't really trust ourselves with that, to be honest.
Look, I mean, our party has that challenge as well. But years ago, if you went to an Australian Labor Party national conference that happens every 3 years, all of those debates would happen out on the floor and the media would see it all and it would all get broadcast, or we'd be washing our dirty linen in front of everyone, right? But now the media complain that national conferences are boring because all of those issues are happening. They're being debated not on the floor, but in sort of side rooms, by folks trying to sort that stuff out. And they work through it, but they're just not doing it in front of everyone. So when they come to the floor and have the debate, everyone's basically kind of got to a position where we've compromised and come to a resolution. So the media hate it. It's boring for them, but it's good for us because then we look like a united front.
So we had a very big... or the biggest resolution, because we have a yearly national conference, and this time it was to also confirm the candidates, no, not the candidates, but the platform that we were going to run with. And one of the biggest issue was the stance on Israel and Palestine, because this is a very emotional topic for many people. It was very current, of course, it was after the news messages started from this fall. And this is actually, I think, one of the examples where they did do that. Like, they put everyone that had very strong feelings and opinions together in a room, and they say, you write a resolution together, and when you agree, we're going to put it to a vote. But this was something that came out during the campaign as well, that people openly disagreed with the campaign's position, and there were big differences within the party as well.
It's tough, isn't it? I mean, it's so tough. I as a campaigner, I've always said to folks, can't make change if we're in opposition. Got to win government first. So let's all focus on that first of all, then we can work out what we're going to do after that. I don't know if that always works, but that's sort of they're the things that guide me. Ali?
Yes, I think this topic of Israel-Palestine did have somewhat of an effect on voter suppression, rather than rather than people actually coming out to vote. It suppressed their vote in the sense that one of the candidates, a very prominent Muslim candidate, withdrew from our candidate list. She was previously a Green Party parliamentarian. She withdrew. She stated that in her withdrawal, I mean, this got me really riled up. At the time, I was really outspoken on WhatsApp. She said that due to the undemocratic processes within the party and suppression of other views, her views, she's going to withdraw from the joint candidate list. And I don't want to speak to them, she said, and I don't want to speak to the media about it. I've said enough, and I'm very clear on my circumstance. And then right at the end, I will, even though I'm withdrawing from the list, I still think you should vote for Green Labour list. Come on, you just completely tarnished us in your statement, and at the end say you're going to still support. That meant doubt. That meant people had doubts about where Labour really stood. Now, another thing occurred. We had one of the biggest climate demonstrations in the Netherlands during the elections. It was going to be one of the unifying moments for the left, because we were gonna make a big stand on climate change. We were going to show the world that the Netherlands, under a Labour Green government, was going to lead in the climate change policies. And of course, who's leading that? The man or the person who led it in the European Union and pushed forward the new Green Deal, Timmermans. What is the biggest news story of that climate demonstration? One person was not able to vocally express support for Palestine. There was a bit of a tussle on the mics. A young Swedish activist took her own mic slot, gave it to the Palestinian. The Palestinian said something controversial, and then at the end said, make sure you vote for a party that supports Palestine, and that party is not the Labour Party. Okay.
Was that during the campaign? I didn't know that was. I
That
saw
was
that on
during the
Twitter. I didn't realize
campaign.
that was going.
That was
That
Oh,
was like a
our
couple of
biggest
weeks before the elections.
doubt, my friend. That's the amount of doubt that was sown in that moment, and the moment of when the other parliamentarian withdrew, just meant people didn't go out and vote. People were not motivated. They would, and that's our biggest problem on the left, is we put sound policies out, we try to talk to people, but we're just not able to completely convince people that their doubts in us are not founded, because that's all the right has to do. The right wing media person, all they have to do is sow doubts. And just to say my little piece on the UK, I don't think the Labour Party in the UK will win the elections, because the Tories will be very good at sowing doubt in the Labour Party. And this election in the Netherlands is proof of that.
okay, Ali, that's a whole nother podcast that we're going to have to unpick that topic. But I want to wrap up by asking both of you, what's the likely outcome in terms of who's going to form a government? And I'll go to you, Ali, first, and then Lianne will get you to get the final
Uh,
word.
Look, the only way so the center right, VVD, the previous ruling party, has said that they will not join government, but they may support I believe there is on a supply basis. So they will just support per basically per rule in parliament. So I think the most likely outcome is the PVV will form a minority government and will struggle for the next coming years to make any laws. So essentially, if you wanted the remaining rules as they are without change, whoever voted who wanted nothing to change has been successful, because nothing will actually change. No rules will come into place. Only those that basically everyone agrees upon, which means the center-right VVD is in power because they were previous government. What will change is who the PVV put in power or who they empower. And what that means is they will empower a lot of people in the streets to be more vocal and racist and obnoxious and discriminatory. They will enable what we would say very fringe voices in positions of power in the European forums, in the international forums. So you're going to hear a lot of Dutch craziness in the coming couple of years, but there is no actual material impact. There is, because they are a minority government who will only be able to get laws that are agreed upon. I believe that's the most likely outcome.
Interesting. Liana, your thoughts?
Well, in terms of forming a government, so even though we have so many parties in parliament, there's four big ones sort of that have to fight amongst themselves basically to figure this out. One of us is the Labour Party and the Green Party. We already said like we are not gonna join a right-wing government. So then there's three of them left: the VVD, PVV, NSC, who have a majority together. The VVD said for now we don't want to join the government, but they also said that 20 years ago and they still ended up in the government, so they might change their mind in a couple of weeks or in a couple of months when these negotiations drag out and consider, their sense of responsibility for the country. And I'm pretty sure they can frame this in a way that they can still join. I think the BBB will play a large role because of the amount of seats that they have in the Senate as well. And I think there are a lot of policies that they could agree on amongst themselves relatively quickly. Even if it's a minority government, that is a very real possibility. I think the VVD would prefer that because it gives them a lot of power. Because then there's three parties in the government, they can sort of lean back and say, well, whatever proposal we like, we'll support. Whatever proposal we don't like, we won't support. And therefore, I don't think that that's an option that the rest of them would want to go for, because you do give away a lot of power that way. And it's going to be quite difficult for them to get support anywhere else based on the division in parliament. I'm a little less optimistic as Ali that like this new government wouldn't be able to make a lot of changes. I think there's a lot of parts of our governmental system that are depending on sort of informal norms instead of laws. Like if you look at how our Supreme Court is appointed, for example, like that's not part of the Constitution. We don't have a constitutional check. The Parliament is supposed to be the constitutional check, so they can actually pass laws that are not according to the constitutions if they want to. So there is definitely a lot of things that feel like they are at risk in the coming years, and even if it's only for 2 years instead of 4 years, like lots of things could change. But as it looks now with the division of seats, I would say it's most likely that we will get a right-wing government, and that both us and other progressive and left-wing parties will be in the opposition.
Rightio. Well, on that note, I always like to end the podcast on a high note, but unfortunately, we're just going to have to. I know we're just going to.
I can supply that if you want. I can supply that if you want.
Please do.
If we look at Poland, where the far right was completely in power for 8 years, tarnished the rule of law, destroyed all sense of democratic norms. What that meant is the left, the center left, even the center right, need to get very serious about working together to protect the rule of law and to protect democracy. Unfortunately, people don't work on preventing these things happening, and so they need to physically feel threatened by them. And this is the moment that this is going to happen. Our democracy in the Netherlands, in Europe, is under direct threat as a result of Wilders. I say, you go for it, Wilders. Do what you want, because all you're going to do is make us stronger. Maybe not in 4 years, maybe not in 2, but definitely in 8.
Here. But you've heard it here. I'm going to hold you to that. All right. Lianne, wonderful to meet you for the first time. And thank you so much for coming on the show today. I've really, really enjoyed your insights. And we must have you back on again in the future.
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. Thank you for having me.
And Ali, as always, thank you so much. If those out there are listening in podcasts and want to listen to a European-based social democratic podcast, please check out Forging Links. I think we'll put the links to the episode in our show notes for today's episode. And Ali, you're back on the show in a couple of weeks' time as you're our guest to do our end-of-year wrap-up of international politics. I look forward to talking to you then.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right. Take it easy, guys. Hey there. Thanks for listening to Socially Democratic. Did you like the podcast? Hit the follow or subscribe button and be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. And to get all the latest updates on Socially Democratic, follow Dunn Street on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we'll see you next Friday. Socially Democratic was brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. Maurice Blackburn Lawyers have spent more than a century paving the hard path to justice for everyday Australians. They've helped over 500,000 Australians turn their situation around, and they know how the system works. Their experience and skills means you'll get the best results possible. Find out more on their website, mauriceblackburn.com.au. Maurice Blackburn, experience you can count on. Socially Democratic was brought to you by SwiftFox. Every moment on a campaign matters. You need the tools that you can trust, lists that are up to date, phone banks that can change minds, emails that drive donations, events that will energize the community online and offline, and text blasts that distill your message perfectly. SwiftFox CRM is made for campaigners by campaigners. To find out more, go to swiftfoxcrm.com to win your next campaign.